see the name tags. They're coming. Welcome back. We'll now proceed with the second panel. I'll turn over to the hearing officer, Mr. LeBaron.
Thank you, Chairman Hirschman. Witness panel 2 is composed of the following individuals from my left nearest the Board of Inquiry. Mr. Mike Eitel from the Federal Aviation Administration, Captain Darren Galbranson from the Boeing Company, Mr. Kwang Hee Lee from the Korean Office of Civil Aviation, Captain Sung-Gil Lee from Asiana Airlines, Captain Rod McNaughton from Cambridge Communications Limited, Captain Byung Kwan Yu from Asiana Airlines. The NTSB technical panel is composed of, starting on my right, Mr. Bill English, Mr. Chong Kwan Park, Dr. William Bramble, Captain Roger Cox, the panel lead, and Mr. John DeLisi. I now ask that the witnesses please stand to be sworn. If you'd raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth? If so, answer I do. Please be seated. Chairman Hirschman, these witnesses have been pre-qualified and their respective experience and qualifications appear in the docket as exhibits in Group 1. I now turn the questioning over to Captain Roger Cox.
Adam, if you would start working on pulling up Exhibit 2M, page 3 and 4.
And thank you, Mr. Cox, for starting off like that. If I could just ask everyone who might be asking or answering questions, before you begin, please identify the exhibit, number, and page that you'd like the team to pull up. It does take a minute to pull it up, so identify the exhibit first, and that'll speed things up. Thank you, Captain Cox.
Okay, my first question will be directed at Mike Eitel. You were chairman of the Flight Standardization Board for the 777. Can you tell us briefly what is the function of this FSB?
Okay, the Flight Standardization Board is one of three functions that the Aircraft Evaluation Group handles, and we are part of Flight Standards. So the FSB is the operational part, and we determine pilot type ratings, the minimum training program, flight checking and currency. We also conduct the initial type rating checks for the FAA, manufacturers, and possibly the initial cabinet for the operators.
And I might ask you to speak a little more closely to the mic when we're speaking here so everybody can hear. When we investigated Asiana training, we found the stall protection demonstration was not a proficiency check requirement. Asiana used the demonstration provided in the Boeing Flight Crew Training Manual. And Adam, have you found that? There you go. It's included here in the Flight Crew Training Manual. Can you tell me if this demonstration is consistent with the 777 FSB report?
Yes, it is. We only require a demonstration of the event. If we were to do it for real, we'd have to turn off so much of the automation that it would become an unrealistic scenario for the flight crews, and basically all fly-by-wire aircraft, 777, 787, and the Airbus fly-by-wire airplanes have the same requirement.
Okay, well, you anticipated my question, but I'll restate it. This is a demonstration. It is not actually hands-on flight. It is not actually a check ride requirement. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's a demonstration during the training program.
And can you just reiterate for me why it's not something that is checked in this airplane?
Due to the fact that we'd have to turn off so much automation that would become unrealistic for the check ride.
In the 777 FSB, did you require pilot proficiency in underspeed, that is stall or overspeed protections?
Well, since it's during the training program, obviously even as a demonstration, the crew still have to be able to demonstrate satisfactory understanding of the stall recovery maneuver and that type of stuff.
So, well, let me tell you, but I want to verify whether pilots have to demonstrate proficiency in underspeed or stall in their training.
Yes, they do.
And how do they do that?
Through the flight training program, the training instructor would check that off that he was proficient.
So pilots do perform stall recoveries?
It'd just be a demonstration.
Just the demonstration.
Yes.
When the FSB approved, Mike, the 777, did you anticipate that the airplane might stall because it was in flight level change and hold mode?
No.
Can you elaborate on that a little?
Well, basically, flight level change in the hold mode there, like Captain Cashman said, that the airplane is descending or going up to an assigned altitude. And in my experiences during the training program, doing check rides or operational flight, if we did have to level off an intermediate altitude, the pilot would, if thrust started to decay, he would automatically push the throttles up to keep the airspeed where it should be, or select another mode that the speed mode engage. So that's not something that I've seen in fly-by-wire aircraft.
Okay. We talked a little bit about how Boeing pilots transition from one airplane to another earlier, but I'm interested now in any special requirements that the FSB may have put on pilots transitioning from non-Boeing airplanes with perhaps different handling, such as an Airbus. Is there any requirement by the FSB to have that kind of training done?
So an Airbus pilot transition to a Boeing 777 would require a full transition course, which would be the 21-day course. You'd have to meet the E and F requirements, training and checking, and then any special items we may have identified in the FSB report, and that would be tack on, tack off, low speed awareness, those type of things. But basically, the 777 is pretty much a basic airplane for us.
Have you been involved in FSBs for other Boeing airplanes besides this one?
Yes, Boeing 737, yes.
Is this the first Boeing that you've seen that has a full-time auto throttle?
No, the Boeing 787 is the same design.
I'm sorry?
The Boeing 787 has the same design?
Okay, so the later airplane has the same design?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, let me move now to Mr. Gulbranson. You are at Boeing training?
That is correct.
And what is Boeing's role in Asiana's training?
Boeing has a limited role in Asiana training. We have a partner, Boeing Korea, which we use a contract through CCL, Cambridge Communications Limited, that Captain Naughton is here sharing with us on the panel. Boeing provides training initially to customers who purchase new airplanes. In the case of Asiana, though, we are providing a contracted piece of their training program. That is the full flight portion of their training. Asiana conducts the ground school portion and the procedures training, and Captain Naughton could probably speak to that, or somebody from Asiana would be able to cover the details more on that.
Could I ask all of the witnesses to make sure they pull their microphones close
Sorry.
and that they speak clearly and loudly? We have translation services, but it's not just that. I think for all of us to be able to hear better, it would help. Thank you.
When you are involved in training, can you tell us a little bit of background on the kinds of training that you do and that Boeing training does in terms of the scope, the number of airlines and operators that you train, and so forth?
So Boeing, as a global company, we have a very large global group that we train. We see a lot of different experience, different operators from that world side. So when a customer purchases a new airplane, in the case of the 777 or the 787, we provide training as a part of that airplane sale. Our training program, the Boeing program, if you will, is based upon FAA criteria. We also maintain curriculum for EASA and for other regulators around the world. But we teach that basic FAA, as Mr. Itel has mentioned, to meet the requirements of that. That typical course is meant for an experienced pilot who's coming in a transport category aircraft. And as he's mentioned, based on what type of experience they have coming from a non-Boeing glass airplane, we would put them in a transition course, and coming from a Boeing glass airplane, we would put them in the shortened transition or STAR course, which accounts for some commonality of Boeing procedures and systems.
Okay, well, one of the things I was trying to focus on is the broad variety of pilots that you get to train. People across the globe with many different cultures and many different backgrounds. And the reason I ask about that is I would like to have your perspective, based upon your experience, on the kinds of manual flying skills and the kinds of automation flying skills that you're seeing amongst the many different students that you train.
Okay, I could see, many different aspects to that, depending on the experience of the pilot again. Just most recently, a few months ago, I had a very young first officer from, a country in Asia, and they had very high automation skills. I've flown with some high-time pilots from other parts of the world whose automation skills were, I'd say, weaker than their manual flying skills. So the manual flying skills are something that we practice in training. We spend a good amount of time in the Boeing course covering manual flight skills to make sure that we're covering, showing proficiency in that with the operation of the airplane.
Have you noticed any trend in terms of the kinds of manual flying skills that pilots bring to training now?
I can't speak of a specific trend.
And what does Boeing training do to promote active monitoring?
Boeing's philosophy on our normal procedures, starting out right in the beginning of a normal procedure, is to maintain the pilot responsibility, as we mentioned earlier, to maintain course, path, and speed. We talk about the crew resource management part of the cockpit management, that as we make changes in our modes, changes in the automation, that we call out those changes. And we recommend that that's good crew resource management process to do that. As we go through training, we cover the various mode changes, announce them, and make sure that interface is happening, that the crew is aware of them.
Let me move to Captain McNaughton. First, would you please explain your role and that of the other contract instructors in Asiana's training?
Yes, excuse me. Boeing Korea has a contract with Asiana Airlines to deliver certain
Could you pull the microphone just a little bit closer?
Boeing Korea has a contract and has had a contract with Asiana for the past 12 years to deliver a certain portion of their training, particularly full flight simulator training. The areas of training that Asiana has, to name a few, are things like initial training, transition training, recurrent training, and other types of training. As an example, if we consider the Asiana typical transition course, there's a ground school portion which deals with aircraft systems and those types of things. There's a procedures training, and then there's a full flight training portion. Each of those, the ground school is about 170 to 200 hours. The fixed base or the procedures training is approximately 20 hours. Full flight simulator is approximately 20 hours, and then that's all followed by line ops or line flying. The portion that Boeing Korea is involved in is only the fixed base portion. Boeing, all the other types of training delivered by to the students is done by Asiana Airlines.
Okay, so the follow-on for me is who designs the curriculum and the simulator profiles?
Those are done by Asiana and provided to us.
What input do you and the other instructors have to that?
When it comes to the the full flight simulator, initial, those types of things. Generally, at the initial stage, we have very little involvement. However, as the instructors either use the profiles or if they're given to us with any revisions, we give those to our chief flight instructor and the pilots, or pardon me, the instructors themselves to review. If they have any questions or concerns, then those are brought forward and we deliver that to Asiana. In the case of recurrent training, again, Asiana develops the scenarios. We get those well in advance. We have the opportunity to review them, discuss them with our instructors, and they in turn feed back to us, first to their CFI, and then to the managers. We in turn then deliver that, go back to Asiana on that for their consideration.
Let me focus on some specifics. Does Asiana encourage the maximum use of automation in flight?
They do, I believe. Their manual state to the extent possible to use it.
When you are conducting training in simulators, you or the other instructors, we understand that visual landings are trained in the simulator. Do you expect the pilots to be able to make visual landings without any vertical cues?
Well, first I should say that myself and the other manager, we're no longer instructing the aircraft and have not instructed any Asiana pilots. Our expectation is that the pilots would, because they're coming from other aircraft, they've got a good background in flying, they have a good background in visual approaches and such, and they're just transitioning to an airplane like the 777. So we expect that they would be able to fly the airplane manually. The profiles during the course of the training, there's a number of different visual manual flying procedures or scenarios in those programs.
What I'm getting at, whether it's you that's instructing or the other instructors that are instructing, you know all of them and you kind of know what's done there in the simulator. The question is, how do we train pilots as to the cues that they're supposed to use to make visual approaches and landings? And so I want to kind of go down that a little bit. For instance, does Asiana train pilots to use the vertical deviation indicator when they're making approaches?
That's correct, they do.
Would that be in all kinds of approaches?
They're instructed, as far as the instructors go, they teach the pilots to use whatever aids are available and generally to build a vertical path at all times.
I just kind of wondered, because we talked to the accident pilots and they were not aware that there was a vertical deviation indicator. They didn't recall seeing it at all. So I just kind of wondered if that was something that was emphasized during training.
It is something that is emphasized for sure.
What about leaving the autopilot on approaches to 1,000 feet? Is that customary when you're flying visual approaches?
I would say yes.
When the autopilot is left on to the 1,000 feet, from that point on, if the airplane is trimmed, there's really very, very little input that a pilot has to make except for the flare.
That's correct.
Would you consider that to be adequate training for manual flying skills?
And well, they do other types of manual flying in the either recurrent training or in the transition courses, where they're set usually on the downwind leg, manual flight, no aids, and to conduct a full visual approach with no aids.
So as I understand it, based upon what we've been told, there's a kind of a profile that's introduced in training that pilots are supposed to follow when they fly a visual approach. It's a downwind base and final, and that's taught over and over again. So the question I would have would be, what does Asiana training do to give pilots the opportunity to fly other kinds of visual approaches, such as straight-in approaches?
Well, considering the type of airplane, especially in the 777, it's only going to major airports. We're very limited on being able to do circling approaches and such thing. But generally, the pilots that transition to the airplane come from other types of airplanes where they would have had considerable background in that.
Did Asiana train pilots to use both flight level change and hold at the same time during an approach?
That is the choice of the pilots to what modes he will use, and that may be one of them on descent.
All right, so let me shift a little bit while I have you here. I'd like to talk about the methods that Asiana uses to ensure that new instructor pilots are able to balance their roles as the pilot in command, as the instructor, and as the pilot monitoring multiple roles. What does the curriculum call?
Okay, well, firstly, they're fully qualified on the airplane as a captain. The instructor training program usually involves 3 simulator sessions, which they are doing all the flying and their maneuvers from the right-hand seat. We'll set up often a scenario where on a discrete frequency they would ask the person in the, which would be the pilot flying at that time on a takeoff, to maybe do something that he would be not make the proper responses or the correct actions, and force the instructor in training in the right-hand seat to take over. It could be a rejected takeoff or failing to rotate or something.
Would a scenario involve perhaps getting low and slow on an approach?
It could, but I don't know that it's specifically laid down that way.
Okay. Let me talk a little bit about Asiana's training for stalls and low-speed protection. Now, we've already talked about what's in the flight crew training manual. That is a demonstration.
Mm-hmm.
And it's our understanding that Asiana does do that demonstration. Is that right?
That's correct.
Over and above that, what training does Asiana give its pilots for stall, recovery, and low-speed protection?
It is basically the same as laid down in the Boeing flight crew training manual.
Okay. So beyond that, Asiana does not?
No.
Okay. And are you comfortable with that?
Yes, I am.
I ask that question because other airplanes, typically we do require pilots to demonstrate proficiency in recovering from stalls.
That's correct, but as outlined earlier this morning in panel 1, there's the low-speed protection and the auto wake-up features of the auto throttle that should protect against those types, where the other airplanes do not have that.
I see. One final question for you. That is, when pilots are asked to operate into airports that may have an irregular operation, where the threshold is displaced, where you have an angling final like an LDA, or where you have other kinds of irregularities, and the automation simply isn't designed for that, what measures does Asiana training take to ensure pilots are skilled enough to be able to handle that?
Usually Asiana's training profiles are set up for airports that they operate to with that type of aircraft. And a good example would be in New York. There's a lot of maneuvers and approaches done to, using the Canarsie approach would probably fit into what you're saying.
Okay. So you're saying that the Asiana pilots have the opportunity to learn these manual flying skills on visual approaches?
That's correct.
Okay, let me now move to Captain Sung-Kil Lee. I believe that you are chief pilot for the Boeing 777 at Asiana, is that right? We learned during our investigation that Asiana pilots are expected normally, when flying a manual or visual approach, to use the autopilot down to 1,000 feet, even on visual approaches. Is that basically true?
I'm going to jump in here just a second. We've switched to consecutive translation So what you need to do when you respond, if you could go slow, stop for the translator, and then watch me. I'll tell you once the translator interprets it into English. Thank you.
1,000 feet is for the stable approach. 1,000 feet. 1,000 feet is for the stable approach from autopilot to manual flying. But if the pilot wants to aviate the flight at the more than 1,000 feet, I think the pilot can do so. Done.
1,000 feet는 오토메이션 플라이트에서 매뉴얼 플라이트로 전환하여 매뉴얼 플라이트로 안정되게 접근하기 위한 최저 고도로 권고된 고도입니다.
1,000 feet is the required minimum altitude for stabilized approach by transitioning from autopilot to manual flying skill. Done.
만일 1,000피트 이상에서도 상황에 맞게 조종사가
Even at more than 1,000 feet, if the pilot wants to change, the pilot can always turn off the autopilot and turn into the manual flying skill. Done.
Is a pilot punished if he flies manual approaches? Is a pilot receive negative remarks if he flies a manual or visual approach for the full approach?
No, not at all. It never happens.
현재 실제
Adam, if I could, please.
Currently, for the small and medium-sized airplane and domestic airplane whose flying time is within 1 hour, actually there are a lot of different types of approaches is made by the pilot. Done.
Adam, would you bring up Exhibit 2F, page 5 and 6? The accident pilot flying got only 4 landings at San Francisco out of 29 trips and only 12 landings total in 95 flights in the Boeing 747 over a 7-year period during the time he was flying that airplane as a first officer. Is this lower than normal?
이강국 기장이 보잉 747에서 비행을 한 것은 약 10여 년 전의 일입니다. 이강국 기장이 그 당시에 어떠한 상황에서 이륙을 하고 착륙을 했는지 현재 저희 입장에서는 설명할 수 없는 입장입니다.
It has been more than 10 years since Captain Lee Gang-guk actually landed in San Francisco with a Boeing 747, and we are not able to give an explanation under what kind of situation he landed at SFO. Done.
하지만 보통 헤비 트래픽이나 스페셜 에어포트나 워크로드가 많이 있는 샌프란시스코 공항이나 시카고 공항, 존 F 케네디 공항 같은 곳에서는 대부분 숙련
However, for the airports, such as San Francisco Airport, Chicago Airport, or John F. K. Airport that has the characteristic of the specialty or heavy traffic or heavy workload, that case, more skilled pilot is in charge of landing and takeoff. Or other cases where it is deemed as safe, then FO can take over and be in charge of takeoff and landing.
Of the landings that pilots receive, and if you find that first officers are not getting enough landings, do you take action?
예, 물론입니다.
Yes, in Asiana Airlines, we are meeting the requirement of the hours or times of landing and takeoff. And within Asiana Airlines, we have a schedule monitoring system. So we are, based on this monitoring, we notify each pilot if they met the specific requirement or not. And if it is known that they didn't meet the requirement, within 30 days, we arrange the schedule to reflect that status and make the enough change for those pilots to meet the required times of landing and takeoff.
That Asiana pilots, particularly first officers, get enough airplane landings to remain proficient in landings?
그렇습니다.
Yes, I think so.
Asiana Airlines is a long-haul airline. Many flights over 5 hours, in some cases 10 hours, which raises the question if they have enough opportunity to practice landings. What steps does Asiana take to ensure that pilots get enough practice in landings?
As I mentioned previously, all pilots of Asiana have to meet the required hours that is regulated by the Korean Aviation Act. And every 6 months, through BTSK, which is Boeing's Korean partner, the pilots are receiving the enough chance to practice landing and takeoff through the simulator by the excellent instructors.
특히
In particular, for Boeing 777, all the captain and first officer have enough experience. they have enough experience not only for the Boeing 777 and also small size airplane, which is Airbus 320, and also medium size airplane of Boeing 760. In case of captain, they have 5-year experience, and first officer, they have to have more than 3 years, and they both of them meet this requirement.
In the case of our accident pilot, he did say he felt stressed.
So, and also it is shown in the exhibit as well. And for the Boeing 777, the first officer has enough time of the experience, and in terms of the landing, in as of 2012, they met the 36% of the landing experience. Done.
In the case of our accident pilot, he said he felt stressed because he had to fly the visual approach without the glide slope. Can you explain why he would feel that way?
질문을 다시 한번 해주시겠나요? 즉, 답변을 하시는 분이 추측을 하지 않도록 좀 더 정확하게 질문을 해주시기 바랍니다.
Let me restate. The San Francisco glide slope was out of service beginning in June. And so this information was known well in advance of the accident flight. The B777 provides a vertical profile on the navigation display for such approaches when the glide slope is not absent. The accident pilot stated he was stressed about not having a glide slope. Did you consider advising pilots to use this feature during the period that the glide slope was out of service by way of a bulletin or other advisory?
예, 캡틴 이강국은 토탈 10,000시간 이상의 충분한 비행 경험을
Captain Lee is a very well experienced pilot and his flying hours accumulated more than 10,000 hours. He also has 3,000 flying hours for Boeing 737, and he has also 5-year experience as a captain for Airbus 320. So he has enough experience, for example, for small size airplane, and also for the domestic airlines, of which the flying hour is less than 5 hours. domestic airlines and the international flights, which is less than 5 hours. He has experience of the flying of 160 times a year. He was very experienced, and he was a very experienced pilot for visual approach. He also has more than 10-year experience for Boeing 747, and he also has experience of the 29 times of approach to San Francisco International Airport. All pilots make utmost effort to make it safe in the terminal area and to make safe approach. Done.
Summarize this question by saying, did you, as the chief pilot for the 777, have any concerns that Asiana pilots would have difficulty making an approach at San Francisco without the glide slope?
네,
I don't understand, or I cannot tell how much stress Captain Lee received because he was such an experienced pilot.
Cox, I'm sorry. Please proceed.
현재
수고하십시오. So Asiana Airlines are providing various trainings for visual approach, and also through the recurrent training, which occurs every 6 months, we are providing more than 10 times of various types of landing training. And also they have to pass the requirement that is set strictly by the Boeing Korea.
Question. And so please go ahead and ask it again, because I don't think it was answered directly.
Correct. I once again asking the question, do you, as the chief pilot, did you feel any concern about the ability of any Asiana pilot to land at San Francisco without a glide slope indication?
우려가 없습니다.
That's correct. I do not have any concern. Done.
Thank you. Would like to direct a question to Byung-Jun Yu. I believe you are the Director of Training.
예, 그렇습니다.
Yes, that's correct.
I will ask you a question similar to what I asked Captain McNaughton. What methods does Asiana use to ensure that new instructor pilots can manage their roles as both the instructor pilot and the pilot monitoring, as well as pilot in command?
거기에 대해
Regarding the training and operation of the instructor, we have a very clear standards and criteria. for those select candidates for the training that was selected by the system, we provide quality training for those people to be a highly experienced instructor, such as ground school training, simulator training, and OE training. When we select the candidates, they at least have to have 3 years of non-penalty period, and they also have to be recommended based on the system requirements. In particular, as you can see from the Exhibit 2 uniform section, those instructor pilots, through their extensive simulator training, they are trained on various aspects of PIC, PF, and PM roles so that they can have a safe flight in place.
You to give me specific examples of what you do in training to help a new instructor understand how far he can let a trainee go.
So I didn't quite understand your question. Can you repeat your question, please? Can you slow down and repeat your question more clearly so that I can understand your question?
Every instructor pilot must make a judgment as to how far he lets a trainee deviate from glide path, airspeed, and other procedures. What specific things does Asiana do to teach new instructors how to manage this?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. I understood. Regarding that, we have a clear training model and clear training programs. The instructor pilots put their first and top priority on the safety through various training procedures, and also they put emphasis on improving the proficiency or ability of the trainees. And to this end, we have various courses in place. So during the flight training, if there is a deviation for the first time, the trainee will get some notice and warning from the instructor saying that there's a deviation. And if this deviation happens more than twice, then the instructor will actually take over due to the safety issue.
Okay, for my final witness, Mr. Kwang-hee Lee, you are a manager for the Korean Office of Civil Aviation, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Conduct check rides and observations of Asiana flights, or does your office delegate these activities to Asiana?
Not just because of this accident, but at Korean office, KO, we always supervise and oversee the airplane and operations.
저희는
Based on our annual, monthly, and weekly plan, we have this continuous oversight system in place through our supervisor. So even at this exact hour, our monitoring is still going on. Next segment, please.
Korean aviation regulations available in English?
예,
Yes, there is an English version for that, but as to whether there is a latest version to that or not, I need to look into it. Yeah, next segment, please.
Cox, the panel, we're out of time. Mr. Park, if you can limit your question just to one at this point. We may have time when we come back around.
아시아나 항공 유병
I would like to ask Captain Yu of Asiana. For Asiana, the highly automated flight training, Asiana introduced a simulator from Boeing. The Boeing simulator training, for that, is Boeing is directly involved or not?
저희 시뮬레이터 풀 플라이
Our company's full flight simulator training is conducted by Boeing Korea.
교관님께 질문 드리겠습니다. 사고 당시 아시아나 항공 조종사들의 시뮬레이터 교육을 담당했는데요.
Aircraft was
차고기 조종사들의 인터뷰 결과와 다른 기장들의 진술을 살펴보면 오토 스로틀이 홀드 모드가 되면 스로틀이 자동 지원되지 않는다는 사실들을 기장이 잘 모르고 있었고 이런 상황이
and the pilots actually put down some of the actual cases on their notepad because there are some unexpected situations happen. I would repeat my question from the beginning. According to the interviews for the accident aircraft pilots and other pilots, when auto throttle is in hold mode, the throttle is not automatically supported, and this fact was not so much well known amongst the pilots, and some pilots actually had this situation happen unexpectedly, and they had such cases put down on their notepad. Why did pilots know that this is unexpected situation and they now so much well know about this? Can you explain the reason behind this?
Who is your question
Who's
directed
the question for?
To Rod McNaughton, please. Captain Rod McNaughton, please.
Sorry, was not sure who the question was directed to. Could you please restate it?
한번 다시 하겠습니다.
Actually, I think if we could just get the interpreter to restate it.
Okay.
Go ahead, if you could.
So basically, according to the interviews with the accident aircrafts and other pilots, they said that if the auto throttle is in hold mode, the throttle is not supported automatically, and they did not know this fact that much. So I just wanted to know, and some of the pilots actually had this happen unexpectedly, and they had that down in their notepad because it was an unexpected situation for them. So he was just wondering why these pilots did not know so much about this fact, and why did they think this was unexpected situation?
Well, first, when the pilots get to the full flight simulator training, our expectation is that that's being covered in systems ground school and procedures training, and they should be aware of it. We deliver the full flight portion, the profiles and the scenarios that's set out by Asiana, and if the instructor at any time notices an area where the student is not familiar with or is not clear, we would expect the instructor to bring that to their attention. The scenarios that are used in full flight may not necessarily directly relate to that particular thing you're mentioning. But again, our expectation is that the students would have knowledge of that prior to getting to the full flight simulator.
Chairman, the tech panel is finished.
Thank you. We'll move to the parties. Asiana.
Thank you. I have a question for Captain Yu, Byung-Won Yu. I have two questions. Does the Asiana training program prepare pilots to fly visual approaches without the glass loop?
Can you?
Training program prepare pilots to fly visual approaches without the glass loop?
Yes, I think so.
Have you personally ever heard on Asiana Pilot express reluctance to perform a visual approach?
조금 다시 한번 좀 말씀해 주십시오.
Yeah, I'll ask you slowly. Okay. Have you personally heard on Asiana Pilot express reluctance to perform a visual approach?
통역이 조금 저기 한 것 같은데요. 제가 영어로 답변을 드리시면은 그 전혀 없습니다.
I would like to answer in English, but there is no such case. I'd like to ask you in English. For Asiana Airline pilots, have you ever listened to any expression that Asiana Airline pilots lack of proficiency? No. Out of 1,360 pilots, half of them had military experience and half of them come from the civil industry. So those 50% of the people who are coming from the civil sector all have FAA's private commercial license. And many of them have already trained in the United States based on the U.S. program.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Asiana Pilot Union.
Yes, Madam Chairman. Mr. Yu Byung-kwan, 아시아나 시뮬레이터 트레이닝 프로그램 어느 한 부분에라도
One of the Asiana training simulator training program, when the auto throttle was in hold mode and the flight level change mode, have you ever experienced a low speed flight? No. No, actually there is an item like explaining the general hold mode, but there is no specific item. Done. If no, are you totally dependent on FCOM's note? Done. Yes, I do. Done.
descent or approach pace, where you would use flight level change versus vertical speed?
I couldn't quite understand. Please repeat.
Yes. Is there a situation in the descent or approach phase where you would use flight level change versus vertical speed?
I understand. Is there a situation in a descent where you'd use flight level change versus vertical speed? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we use flight level change, as it was explained in panel 1, to change from one level to another. So in a descent for an approach, setting a lower altitude and then descending to that altitude with flight level change is a normal use of flight level change. In that execution of that portion of an approach, you would expect the flight level change mode to change, be enunciated, and you also expect the throttles to go to idle in relation to the amount of change you have to make for that altitude and set the thrust accordingly. And the thrust could end in hold. You could also use vertical speed as a different mode to descend, a different vertical mode, and use the vertical speed portion of the descent. And that's up to the pilot, to their use of the automation.
Yes, I have another question, Gorbrands. As a hypothetical, you are flying a visual approach manually, speed 210 knots, speed brake deployed. At 1,500 feet, you find yourself significantly above the approach path and fast. How do you set the auto throttle to assist you in the approach?
So your energy state is high and fast. You have your speed brake out. You're trying to slow down, and the auto throttle is what you're asking for. So what mode is the pitch in at this point?
Manual.
So you're manually flying the airplane. If you bring the throttles back to idle, and there is an active mode of the auto throttles, if the pilot is taking control of the throttles, the expected mode on the auto throttles would be to go to hold. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And
that hold enunciation, when it makes that transition, that would be enunciated with a green box around that new mode enunciation to draw the pilot's attention. We would also teach that the pilots would call out that mode change so that the other crew member was aware of the change, and the pilots are aware of the fact that they are in hold and what that means in relation to the auto throttles.
Okay, it's enough your answer. And okay, Mr. Yu Byung-kwang, 교관 기장이
When the pilot instructor during the flight did some training or evaluation, PICP, among PICP and IP, which one comes the first as a responsibility? Done. What is the order or sequence among those three? The pilot in command comes the first. Done.
Boeing procedure to fly the Boeing 777, or have they modified any procedure?
Again, I'm not completely familiar with the Asiana program, but from what I understand, they use a combination of Asiana's pilot operating manual and the Boeing flight crew training manual, but perhaps that could be better answered from Asiana.
Okay. APS, no more question. Thank you.
Thank you. Air cruisers.
Madam Chairman, we have no questions. Thank you.
Boeing.
Captain Gilbranson, does Boeing provide guidance and training on stabilized flight criteria that need to be achieved during landing approach?
Yes, we do. In the flight crew training manual, we adopt the standard stabilized approach criteria set up by the Flight Safety Foundation. Those criteria have altitudes based at 1,000 feet for an instrument approach, and again for 500 feet for a visual approach. Crew laid out criteria, I believe there's 7 of them, things as course, path, speed, throttles in the correct position, checklist completed, and that's a continuing monitoring system by the pilot to follow those stabilized criteria all the way to landing. 500 feet being the part you would check to make sure you were stable, and if they degrade at any point, the criteria clearly state out that a go-around is expected.
Thank you. Captain Gilbranson, we have a follow-up question. There's been a lot of discussion about unexpected behavior with auto throttle and hold. As a check airman, what would you have expected the student to do if he was surprised by auto throttle and hold?
In the procedures in the flight crew training manual, again, we discuss the use of automation and the pilot's choice to use as much or as little as they want. When the automation is not doing what they expected, or surprised, to use a phrase that's been passed around, we expect that the pilot would take control of the airplane and use whatever skills that they needed to do to fly the airplane manually. And that would include reducing the automation, or in the case of a throttle being in hold and not responding to a decreasing airspeed, we would expect an input in the throttle to maintain that speed and to maintain your 3 basic parameters of course, path, and speed.
All right, thank you. Boeing has no further questions.
Thank you. City and County of San Francisco.
Madam Chairman, we have no further questions, or no questions at all. Thank you.
Thank you. FAA.
Madam Chairman, FAA has no questions.
Okay, we'll proceed to the board members. Member Weiner.
Thank you. I'd like to pursue a bit what the process is for training an instructor. So Captain, let's see. Yeah, Captain Boeing Young Yu, how do you identify and choose candidates for instructor pilots?
Asiana has a clear guidance and standard to choose the instructor pilot. According to the certification by the Korea's MOLIs, based on the FSR, there is a criteria specified to be selected as academic instructor and the simulator instructor and the flying instructor. Done. Among those who qualified for this criteria, we actually selected twice as many a number of instructor pilot that we need, and then we just verify those personnel's qualification, and then we select the appropriate instructor pilot. Done. The flight constructor's translation consists of the academic training, including instruction and the leadership, and IPCCLM, and then it is followed by the simulation training done. For the simulator training, the total of 10 trainings are made for PF, PM, PIC, so that the instructor pilot can have a various backgrounds and experiences. Done. Among them, the instruction about the visual approach is also included, and when the student pilot does not control the airplane properly, then the instructor pilot can actually correct the student pilot's action and take over and make a round. Done. In actual operating experience, the instructor pilot actually instruct the student pilot sitting on the right seat while sitting on the left seat, and the instructor pilot have to pass the various experience and test and check. Done. Even after becoming the instructor pilot, every year the instructor pilot must fulfill the proficiency check and CLM to maintain its instructor pilot's status. Done. Statement is done.
Does Asiana have any requirements or rules about pairing a fresh instructor with a basically fresh captain?
As the instructor pilot is already selected among those fully qualified to become the instructor pilot, so there's no criteria regulation to pair the new instructor and the new pilot. Done.
Captain Yu, would you give us a sense of how you compare the effectiveness of the Asiana training program with others around the world? Not compliance, but effectiveness of your training program compared to others? How do you do that?
In terms of effectiveness, all the Asiana's training program meets or satisfies the international standard, such as FIR and EASA. And the Asiana's training program is meeting the standard of FSR, which is equivalent of the Korean FIR. Done. In terms of ground skill training and simulator training, we are trying to meet the standard of a very good program with consultation with manufacturing, Boeing. Not done. The translation not done. So we are meeting the criteria of the good standard program. In cooperation with the manufacturer, Boeing, FCON, and FTCM, in particular, simulation of full flight in order to improve our training quality for the safety operation. We have made a relations or contracted with Boeing Korea since 2001 for better program. Done.
So basically.
그러면 기본적으로는 그 효과성에 대한 평가는 아시아나가 그 스탠다드 맞는 준수한다라는 말씀이신가요? Yes, it is well above the international standard. Yes, it exceeds the international standard.
비교가 가능합니다. 저희 아시아나항공의 훈련 프로그램은 그라운드스쿨, 시뮬레이터, 또 OE 훈련, CRM 훈련에 있어서 특히 시뮬레이터 훈련은 보잉과 2001년부터 협조하면서 양질의 하이 퀄리티를 유지하고 있다고 생각합니다.
So personally, in 1990, I received training for the Boeing 737 in the United States from the Continental Airlines. And in 1993, in order to transition to Boeing 747, I received training from Lufthansa airliners. So I believe that I am well aware of the international standards, and also that gives me the chance to compare those international standards to our domestic standards. So in case of Asiana, we are providing training through ground school, simulator, and OE and CRM. And in particular, regarding simulator, we are providing the training through Boeing, which is a well-known training institution since 2001. Done. 감사합니다.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Asiana, either Captain Lee or Captain Yu, about the previous reference to a visual approach from downwind. So in a visual approach from downwind, what are the responsibilities of the pilot flying and what are the responsibilities of the pilot monitoring? When I ask that question, I mean, what is trained in your training regarding the responsibilities of the pilot flying and the responsibilities of the pilot monitoring in a visual approach from downwind?
So responsibility between two pilots are divided by the responsibility by the pilot flying and the responsibility of the pilot monitoring. So for the monitoring pilot, instructor pilot has the authority and power or responsibility starting from the moment of the departure and to the moment of arrival. Done. So in case of instructor pilot, either he's serving as PF or as PM, he has the final authority. So when he identifies the abnormal flight path or abnormal situation, he recommends correction to the pilot flying. And if the correction is not made by the pilot flying, then the monitoring pilot takes over and has the full authority to operate the airplane. Done. 그러면 모니터링
Performance.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. What is the training regarding what call-outs the pilot monitoring should make? What should the pilot monitoring do to bring to the attention of the pilot flying that the pilot flying is deviating from expected performance?
So monitoring pilot, when he identifies deviation in either flight path or flight control or ACT, he makes call out in a clear way to pilot flying so that he can be aware of the situation and he recommends the correction. And when the correction is not made, the monitoring pilot enforces the call out again. Done.
During the visual approach from downwind.
according to our training, pilot flying is in charge of aircraft control, and flight monitoring is monitoring the flight path or other situations, such as final course and airspeed and sink rate. When pilot monitoring identifies some deviation in these areas, then he makes out the standard call out to make correction to the pilot flying. And then if the correction is not still made by the pilot flying, then pilot monitoring makes another standard call out again to enforce that call out. And if the correction is not made at that point either, then for the safety reason, the pilot monitoring takes over and is in charge of the flight. Done.
Thank you. I'm going to try to ask some basic questions. First, just a yes or no answer. Do you all train on stabilized approach? Boeing?
That was for Boeing?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And in the simulator, yes. Asiana, do you train on stabilized approach?
Yes. 스테이블라이즈 어프로치에 대해서 인디케이터가 뭔지에 대해서 설명해 주실 수 있으신가요? Can I answer to your question? It is clearly stated in the pilot operation manual about the stabilizer, and it is divided.
로 비행할 때로 구분할 수 있습니다.
Can we get the English translation, please?
Can the witness repeat his answer, please?
If it's okay, through English.
Yes, please, proceed.
Yes, for the stabilizer approach, we follow the KOCA's approved POM, Pilot Operation Manual. It involves VFR, Visual Flight Rules, and IFR, Instrument Flight Rules. In case of Instrument Flight Rules, for the IRS approach.
How about if we just talk about a visual approach?
Yeah, visual approach. In case of visual approach, at 500 feet, we satisfied 6 items. Aircraft on the correct course, and the path, and the sink rate within 1,000 feet, and on speed within plus 10 knots, minus 5 knots, and all landing configuration is done, and landing clearance is received.
Okay. So what cues do they use to establish that they are on a stabilized approach inside and outside of the cockpit? What tools are they going to be using for speed and for glide path?
During the visual approach and IFR approach, monitoring is very important, inside and outside. Also, we can have that information from POM, Pilot Operation Manual. The load is divided by PF and PM.
Okay, so let's focus on, let's say, external to the cockpit. when they're looking at glide path, and they might be using the precision approach path indicators or the PAPIs. When you're training for a stabilized approach, what are your expectations if the pilots see on the PAPI 3 red? Would they have to go around?
항공인이면 two red, two white is on pass.
If they see 3 red, what's required?
It depends on the situation. If the pop angle is a little bit high or because of the tolerance of something like that, and just a few seconds, it happens then, if pilots think is correction, then immediately correction. This kind of thing should be briefing during before initiate the final approach course.
What if they see 4 red?
4 red, immediate go round.
Okay.
Immediate.
Okay, if they see 3 red, should they talk about it? Should they discuss that they're low, 3 red?
In case of 3 red, short talk, very short talk. PM can tell 3 red, like this.
Okay.
Then PF should immediate action.
Okay. Adam, could you please pull up Exhibit 13B, the last page? On this exhibit here, at the very bottom of the page, you can see the calculated pilot eye height. You can see the whites and the reds depicted on the left side. You can see a band of red that's 19 seconds where the pilots were in 3 and then 4 red. You can see the red line at the very bottom that indicates 4 red. We have interviews in exhibit number 2B where both the pilot flying and the pilot monitoring indicated that they saw 3 or, for another pilot, 4 reds. What would you have expected from training to happen when that occurred, when they saw 3 or 4 red?
In case of 3 red, then immediately one to the PF, 3 red like this. In case of 4 red, immediate go round.
And from the cockpit voice recorder, do we have any indication that those conversations took place?
12월에 스탠다드 콜아웃이 탑업 standard call-out is established from top of descent. I think not fully satisfied our standard call-out.
Okay, thank you. Member Sumwalt.
Thank you, Adam. If we could have Exhibit 2M, 2 Mike. And Captain Jill Branson, this is for you. I'm going to ask about the section of the 777 Flight Crew Training Manual in the stall protection demonstration, and I'm not sure that you can even read that, what's there, but I want to say, really, I'll read some of this. The objective of the stall protection demonstration is to familiarize the pilot with the stall warning and correct recovery technique. Now, it talks about how to set up the configuration. And in about the second or third line, it says, disengage the autopilot and autothrottle and retard the thrust levers to idle. So it's saying disengage the autopilot and thrust levers. So the autothrust is completely disengaged in that point. Is that correct?
The autothrottle system is still on, but the throttles are disengaged, disconnected.
What was the first part of what you said? I could not hear that.
The autothrottles are still armed. Switches on the mode control panel.
Yes.
The system is armed,
Okay.
but the throttles are not engaged in a mode.
So when you take the autothrottles and you retard them, and let's say that you hold them at the idle stop for, say, 1.1 seconds, 1.5 seconds, what will the mode enunciation be for the autothrottles?
Well, In the case of this demonstration here, you've disconnected the auto throttles, so there will be no mode to see, hold, or anything like that.
Disconnected them with the
the mode will be blank.
Okay.
And you'll get. So that's the answer.
Great. As we go through this, it talks about as the speed decreases into the amber band, the pitch limit indicator appears on the primary flight display. When the speed decreases approximately halfway through the amber band, the airspeed low caution message appears. The auto throttle wakes up and automatically engages in the speed mode and returns the airplane to the minimum maneuvering speed. Just reading this, it would indicate that the throttles do have the ability to wake up. Where does it caution that if you're in a flight level change mode and the auto thrust is in hold, that they will not wake up as we've just described here?
So specifically, I believe it's in Chapter 4 of the Flight Crew Operations Manual, a note that says in flight level changes the mode that the throttle's in hold, they will not wake up. This is a case demonstrating the fact that when there is no active auto throttle mode, meaning that mode window is blank, that this is a case where the auto throttle system will activate to put it into a mode to protect it against speed.
See, if you know all of those nuances, it's pretty clear. But here we are training people, and we're instilling in them that the auto throttle is going to wake up.
Okay, waking up meaning that there is no active mode. Hold is an active mode of the auto throttle system. And the definition of hold is that the servos are disconnected and the pilot has manual control of those throttles. And that mode is enunciated with a green box around that mode window when it changes.
It's enunciated for 10 seconds, correct?
Correct.
Okay, with the green box around it. Okay, thank you. Captain Yu. 안녕하세요. I'd like for Exhibit 2, November, page 6. And here we have from the training slides on stall protection and auto throttle modes for Asiana Airlines. In this slide, it's talking about the stall protection features, and the fourth bullet point is in yellow, whereas the other ones are in black. And that bullet point says, auto throttles engage automatically if armed. Is that slide highlighted in yellow? Is that always highlighted in yellow when you show it, or is it highlighted just for this exhibit to make a point?
So far, we have been actively cooperating with NTSB's request, and we produce many different materials. So to the best of my knowledge, I really can't tell you either way, and I would have to get back to you as to what was the real case.
Could this, well, all right, but this is what you're teaching your pilots is based off of this slide, correct? That the auto throttles engage automatically if armed. This is what you're teaching.
Yes, that's correct. Our flight instructors manufactured this slide, created this flight based on the Boeing's Flight Crew Operation Manual and Boeing Flight Crew Training Manual.
Will not call for the exhibit, but when you were interviewed by the NTSB. It happens to be in Exhibit 14A, page 14. We don't have to call it up. But I believe you said that neither the 777 training module on automatic flight control system nor the Boeing 777 flight control recurrent training indicated that low-speed protection function by the autothrust would not activate if it was in the whole mode. So if it's not covered specifically in training, how do you expect your pilots to be aware of it?
예,
Since 2001, as we have been operating Boeing 777 aircrafts, our instructor pilots accumulated a great deal of experience. So we reflected that experience onto our training materials. So the basis material for our training in terms of Boeing 777 is FCOM and FCTM, but also we created CBT training materials and etc. so that we can keep up the quality training for our pilots and instructor pilots.
Thank
you very much.
Captain Lee, would you agree that your instructor pilots are your most skilled pilots?
I mostly agree, yes.
How do you explain that the instructor pilot who was on the accident flight said that when the instructor pilot was asked if the 777 had automatic speed protection function when it reached minimum speed, he said there was such a function and he knew about it. And the training captain basically said that he expected the 777 auto throttle system to come out of idle to prevent it going below minimum speed. How do you explain that your instructor pilot, who you've just said is one of your most skilled pilots, and a new pilot who has just come out of ground school, okay, so what I want to know is how are you sure that your pilots are adequately trained about the knowledge of this autothrust system?
Yeah.
For Asiana Airlines pilots, they went through ground school training, which overmet the international standards in terms of getting trained on auto flight and auto throttle system.
But we've just said, though, that your training does not cover this system.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. In terms of the flight level change hold mode, we accumulated various types of experience by our instructor pilots. So we reflect that experience in our training, and also the flying pilots of the accident aircraft receive that training. Yes, I'm done. Please go ahead. Also, as Captain Yu mentioned, our ground school program, our full flight simulator training, and our various training programs are based on the flight crew training manual and flight crew operation manual by the Boeing. So based on that, we create our materials and training schedules or plans.
According to Boeing's recommendations, we have a lot of various store protection and a simulation program. And this program is also made at the ground school and supported by the Boeing BTSK. So the pilots can experience a lot of store protection and low-speed protection training done. However, in terms of the hold mode, unfortunately, in the flight crew operation manual and flight crew training manual, the training about the hold mode is not seriously recommended, and not only Asiana Airlines, but also for other airlines. I don't think there is a simulation training for this related to this issue in terms of hold mode done.
We'll go back to Mr. Park.
네.
I have a question to CCL Korea's road magneton instructor. I asked the question before, when the auto throttle was in hold mode, the throttle was not automatically supported. And the pilot stated that they did not about this fact. But regarding this issue, in the manual about this issue, this is clearly described.
Here, our expectation would be that when a pilot came to full flight simulator training, they would have adequate knowledge from their ground school and their fixed base procedures trainer on the various modes of the auto throttle. The instructors, during the course of the training, if there was any indications that they did not understand that, then they would bring it to their attention or discuss it with it and debrief on it. The training material is prepared by Asiana in accordance with their training regulations, and they put the content into the profiles, which basically mirrors what's in the Boeing Flight Crew Training Manual.
In which part of the manual, can you please specify in which part of the manual does this issue is described? Can you please specify? Done.
I cannot give you the specific page number. I know it's probably Captain Calparan's going to do that, but it's in the Flight Crew Training Manual.
Is there another witness who can provide that information?
So yes, perhaps I can speak to that. In the use of, if I understand your question correctly, the hold function. Is that correct?
예. 홀드 모드에서
Yeah, the question is that in the hold mode is not waking up, the throttle is not operated. So does this is specifically described in the manual for the pilot simulation training?
Correct. In the Flight Crew Operations Manual, in Section 4, is the description of the auto flight system, auto throttle system. Hold is one of those modes. It's an active mode. And so it's described in there. It's described in Section 4.20, I believe, the fact that if you're in flight level change, that hold is an expected mode, and that hold would mean that the throttles are not active. I think if we went back to the slide we had earlier, can we please pull that back up on the training slide you had? No? Okay. In that case, the discussion was, would the throttles wake up? And in that FMA was the blank auto throttle mode, meaning there was no active mode. And that is as described in the FCOM, not the CBT slide. But that is a case in where there is no active mode, and that is a case where it's described that the auto throttle will wake up and put the airplane in speed mode. Does that answer your question? So in this case right here, the upper left FMA is blank. There is no auto throttle controlling mode, and that is a situation described when the auto throttles will wake up and activate if they're armed, as the slide depicts.
예, 이 부분은 패널 3에
I think I will deal with this issue in panel 3. I have a question to Rod Magneton, my last question. I think you are in charge of Asiana Pilot simulation training. Do you think there are any insufficient or adequate areas in terms of like simulation training for Asiana airline pilots done?
I think Asiana adequately covers the required training scenarios and what's provided or what's necessary for the pilots to complete transition course.
Do the parties have any follow-up questions? Asiana?
Yeah. I have a question, Captain Byung-Won Yu. Did the pilot flying Captain Lee Gang-guk, trainee, receive a training on the use of the flight level change mode and the potential for the auto throttle to go into hold mode during such an approach?
통역이 제대로 올바르게 됐으면
I'll have a question by Korean, with Korean. 이강국 기장께서
When Captain Lee Gang-guk made such approach, does he know that when he used the flight level change, does he know that auto throttle goes to the hold mode? No. Done. There's no general training. So there's no general training about the hold mode, but it's in particular, like when a specific situation arises, the auto throttle is tripped. Regarding this issue, there's no general training done. Captain Lee Gang-guk when he used the ground skill in terms of the riskiness, in terms of like risky factors when he approached the San Francisco airport. Does Captain Lee Gang-guk have ever received a training regarding the riskiness of the approaching the San Francisco airport? Yeah, I just understand. Yeah, as for the question, yes, Captain Lee Gang-guk received the training, and regarding the training, the exhibit number 2 Delta actually proved my answer. Done. 감사합니다.
Asiana Pilots Union.
APU has no more question. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Do any of the other parties have any additional questions? No? Go back to the tech panel, Mr. LeBaron.
Just 2 points of order, Madam Chairman, that I'll just take for Tim. This is for Mr. Lee of KOCA. You mentioned during one of your answers that I want to make sure this is correct, that you believed that there is a set of Korean flight safety regulations that is in the English language, but it is not necessarily current. Is that correct?
영어로 이제 발간이 된 것이 있는데 지금 있는 것이 최신 버전인지는 제가 확인해야 된다고 말씀드렸습니다.
I said that there is an English version, but I have to check if the English version is the most latest version. Because Korean comes first, and the Korean regulation actually changes frequently, so I'm not quite sure if the English version is the most latest, and I have to check to make it clear. Done. 감사합니다.
Thank you. Will you please provide to the NTSB the latest version of the Korean regulations in the English language by the due date specified by Mr. LeBaron, January 18th?
Yes, I will. 감사합니다.
Second point of order is for Captain Yu of Asiana. You mentioned a slide was up on the board about the training slides, ground school training slides that Member Sumwalt asked you about, and you needed to confirm if the yellow highlight was actually in existence prior to the accident or not. Would you please confirm that the exhibit as we have it now is the pre-accident version of the ground school training? Just make sure you can confirm that to us by January 18th.
Yes, I will.
Thank you. No further.
Thank you all on panel 2. 감사합니다. And we will take a break until 2:30.